to Dr. Richard Cork. Richard is one of this country's preeminent scholars of this period. He is undoubtedly, with Bomberg and Epstein, are his two great artists who he spent most time writing on, I think, and is renowned for his knowledge and scholarship. We are hugely privileged for Richard to lead today.
Well, welcome to our amazingly exciting Epstein tour of London. It is the most extraordinary place to get to know Epstein, actually. We're very, very fortunate because a striking number of his most important and carefully meditated sculptures happen to be in public locations in London. I think actually by the end of today we'll have such an insight into what Epstein was about as a sculptor. One of his great phrases is, I want to carve mountains. And of course, although he never got round to carving mountains, that was actually at the back of his mind all the way through his life. He was, I think it's fair to say, he was haunted by the idea that there was really no limit actually to what a sculptor might be able to do. We're well on our way now to our first port of call, which is Stag Lane. Stag Lane in Putney, where, rather surprisingly actually, Epstein is buried in the Vale Cemetery. I say surprisingly because he's not particularly associated with South London. He's very much a North London man. He lived and worked in North London most of his life, when I think about it. He is very much a Londoner, actually. So it's appropriate that we should celebrate that to begin with by seeing where he is buried. And so I thought it was very appropriate that there was this very simple, almost prehistoric, primeval, rough-hewn lump of stone marking his grave down in Putney. Yeah, I liked it a lot. To the extraordinary carving that Epstein did between 1923 and 1925, so mid-20s we can call it, for this very location. It hasn't been shifted since then. It's been very well looked after, which is not to say that when it was unveiled people didn't want to A, get rid of it, B, daub it with paint as it was. Very often when Epstein's sculptures were unveiled they were vandalized more or less straight away. It's very hard for us to believe now, because looking at Rima as we will, we now cannot understand why anybody would ever have been affronted by it or enraged by it. It just doesn't seem an appropriate response at all. And today we're very fortunate to be able to see it in ideal surroundings. The light falling on it is quite magical. You can see the leaves, can't you, from the trees above. They're casting their shadows down on Rima and her birds. She's thrusting her arms out. She seems to be enfolding her friends, rather like a mother would look after her children. And of course the maternity theme was important to Epstein throughout his life. It meant an awful lot to him. Which is not to say that when this memorial was unveiled it didn't cause the most terrible rumpus. A lot of people called for it to be taken away immediately. The Daily Mail nicknamed it the Hyde Park Atrocity, and vandals came along with green paint which they smeared all over it. So it's a miracle really that Epstein's masterpiece is still here to be enjoyed by us today. We're now leaping forward 3 years because he finished Rima, which we've just seen, in 1925, and 3 years later in 1928 he was given another, by he of course I mean Epstein, he was given another major commission for the headquarters of what was then called the London Underground Electric Railways. It was their headquarters in Westminster, very near Westminster Abbey, as you will see, and oddly enough designed once again by Charles Holden, the architect who had designed his building in the Strand, which we're going to see later on. So Charles Holden comes to Epstein again, they're still friends, and he says, now look here, Jacob, I want several sculptors for this building I'm designing in Westminster. Who can you recommend? So Jacob says to him, well, one of the guys I'm very, very excited by at the moment, he's a young guy, you've probably never heard of him, he's called Henry Moore. Yeah. And Henry Moore, as we will see, was given his first commission for a major, large carving on a building as part of this project in 1928. Not that anyone ever notices, because it's so far up the building that people passing by never spotted, I don't think. But we're going to be very keen-eyed, aren't we? We're going to spot it. And the theme of all the figures around the top of the building were the four winds. Henry Moore carved the west wind, Eric Gill carved two of the winds, and other sculptors, including Eric Aumonier, who is not so well known today, carved others. So all that was going on, quite high up the building. But they were all terribly jealous of Epstein because he was given a much more prominent position, pretty much at street level, with huge carvings on one side night and on the other side day. And they are very, very powerful indeed. Epstein actually carved them on site. I've already said how tough a guy he was. Well, he really was actually. He carved them all through one bitter winter in London, and winters in London in those days were often very bitter, much more than they are now. But that was part of the deal so far as he was concerned. And as we will see, he concentrated in both night and day on this archetypal relationship between a parental figure and a child. And very, very powerful they are too, and very complementary actually, because one of the parent figures is male and the other parental figure is female. One has a child who is stretching up to the father's head. Another one is laid out on the lap of the female, rather like somebody who has died actually. It's almost like a pietà in a religious carving of the Virgin Mary with the dead Christ coming down from the cross. So you get this strong religious overtone there as well. And once again, when they were finally unveiled, it was Epstein who caused all the rumpus. Everybody went mad. And the vandalism got much worse than it was for Rima in Hyde Park. They actually hurled tar and feathers at the carving of Night. And I must quote you Daily Express, who accused Epstein of creating, quote, a blood-sodden cannibal intoning a horrid ritual over a dead victim. This is the kind of stuff that Epstein had to put up with over and over again. It really is quite astonishing.
Okay, well, we've got here in the collection one of Epstein's drawings, sketches, designs for the London Underground headquarters. This is for Day, and I think it's very, very close to the finished sculpture. The biggest difference that I can see in it is that it feels a lot more classical to the finished sculpture. In both Night and Day and the finished sculptures, he does draw a lot more on that, the African tradition, referencing his collections of African sculptures. But in this earlier one, the simplicity of the drawing, the drapery, the leaves and plants really echoes back to a much more sort of classic Greek and Roman tradition. So that's really very different background behind the two of them. He started off just drawing with lines, very typical of Epstein's ideas, which he worked through in his drawings, very simple lines, and then he's taken a pink wash to the surface of it just to give it that sort of three-dimensional tonality. Very, very understated. It doesn't have that same presence, obviously, that the sculptures do.
But anyway, we're now on our way to the Strand, where we're going to stop outside Zimbabwe House. And that is where Epstein did his very first highly ambitious sequence of carvings, no less than 16 life-size carvings, which were commissioned from him by Charles Holden, who designed the building we've just seen on 55 Broadway. He came to see Epstein on somebody's recommendation, because nobody had really heard of Epstein before the Strand statues at all. So it was something of a miracle that Holden was recommended to see him. But immediately they met each other, they hit it off, because they shared a mutual admiration for the poetry of Walt Whitman, the American poet. And they both had this obsession, really, with the idea that what Epstein described as the great primal facts of man and woman, or what Holden described as nakedness, we must not be ashamed, all this kind of thing is in the minds of Holden and Epstein when they're planning the British Medical Association headquarters, the BMA. He wasn't at that stage in his life at all experienced in carving direct himself. So Epstein in the Strand was on a massive learning curve. He learnt a huge amount, not only about carving but also about architecture and also about being in a public location, and also supremely about public hostility. Because what happened was that when the statue of maternity was unveiled, she was an amply endowed lady, a very beautiful carving indeed, and directly opposite the British Medical Association headquarters, and I find this still very hard to believe, was the headquarters of, wait for it, the National Vigilance Association. And all they had to do was look out of their windows one morning, see this amply endowed maternal lady with her child, and go into an absolute fit. And they contacted the Evening Standard, and the following day, on the front page of the Evening Standard, can you imagine, Epstein found himself attacked in headline prose. A huge campaign was mounted in 1908 to get rid of them. The British Medical Association chief executive got really scared and said, yes, I'm sorry, we made a great mistake, we must take them down. But then a counter-campaign was organised by the director of the National Gallery, who was called Sir Charles Holroyd. We like him.
Yes, we do.
Roger Fry, who was the leading critic of the day, people like that, including artists, they all, including Eric Gill, who wrote a wonderful letter to the British Medical Journal saying that Epstein was rescuing British sculpture from the grave. It's a great phrase, isn't it? Yeah. But, okay, so they won the battle. The BMA stood back and said, let's leave it. And everything sort of went down. And then, in 1935, by which time, not Zimbabwe, of course, but what was called the government of Southern Rhodesia had acquired this building, and they didn't like the statues at all. They thought they were undignified, they were unseemly, they were nothing to do with what they wanted to project as their image, whatever that might have been. And so, one day, what happened was a fragment fell down from one of the statues, or so they claim, narrowly missing a pedestrian on the street. And the government of Southern Rhodesia, I suspect, had organised the whole thing themselves, but they claimed that all the statues were unsafe, and a committee was set up, scaffolding was created, and they walked round these statues, tapping them, each one, and saying, this bit's got to go, this bit's got to go, this. Epstein pleaded with them and said, can I join your committee? Can I come up there with you and talk about the statues? Can I bring my own experts? And they said, no, we want nothing to do with you. Extraordinary, isn't it? He's only the artist. It's his work. They wanted nothing to do with him. And So, of course, another press rumpus built up around this, because the press love this kind of thing, you know, and they don't let it go. And so they were able to, I mean, they are just savagely mutilated all the way along. Just so appalling. And the heads!
Why the heads?
I know. Such a tragedy, isn't it? And that is the one that caused the National Vigilance Association, who were probably peering out of this building here. Can you imagine the National Vigilance Association look at that and say, oh my God, this is the most disgusting thing that London has ever witnessed. And look at this. Look at this. It's just so remarkable, isn't it?
Which one? Where is she? Which one is that?
I'll tell you. I mean, you can't believe it. It's that one there.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah,
it's one. Yes, can you see the baby?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 from the right. 6 from the right. But you wouldn't know, would you? You would not know what was there.
And that's the one we've got a drawing of in the garden.
Look at it. It's just so beautiful.
Okay, well this is Epstein's drawing of Girl with a Dove from 1906-07, and it was the sculpture that he made of this that Charles Holden, the architect, saw in his studio in London that triggered Charles Holden into giving the Epstein the commission for the Strand statues. The sculpture doesn't exist any longer. In fact, none of the work that Epstein did at this time exists because Epstein was never satisfied with it. He was always destroying it, remaking another one. But this was a full-scale statue of the girl with the dove, and certainly Charles Holden and Jacob Epstein really hit it off, and Holden thought this work was fantastic, and this is what led directly to the Strand Statues Commission for Epstein. Okay, we've got here Epstein's Study for Maternity for the British Medical Association building in the Strand in London from 1907. His drawing, his sketches, ideas in process, development for those sculptures. In this drawing, the pregnant woman is just that. She doesn't have the child in her arms that in the finished statue you can see that she does. She's just leaning backwards with the gravity of her stomach, and in her hand she has this stick as well, and that's not present in the final sculpture. Up in the right-hand corner there's the word Parvati. We actually don't know whether this is contemporary to the drawing itself or whether it was added later. Parvati is the Indian goddess of motherhood, amongst other things, and Epstein owned a number of Indian sculptures of Parvati, so it could be contemporary to the period. But more than anything else, the sculpture has this strong inked-in outline around it, and that's very much the line that you view the sculpture from in the Strand, or you would do if it was still there. That line's obviously very important to him, that profile. But of course the sculpture was destroyed, and you can still see some of the body and figure there today. Looking at this drawing and looking at the photographs of the sculpture, it's very, very hard to understand what it was that caused so much outrage in people about these sculptures. The National Vigilance Society maybe, but I think maybe even today, if you tried to put a statue of a naked pregnant woman in a town such as Walsall, there would still perhaps be a hue and a cry about it. So maybe we haven't actually moved that much more on in the 100 years or so since this was made. Hello Neil, we've just come down to the archives, see whether I can find out anything in possibly the Epstein manuscript about any of the works that we saw on the Memorial Day. There may be letters and things here as well that have reference to possibly the TUC memorial, Strand statues, I'm really not sure, but I'm sure there's stuff in the Epstein manuscript. And I know we've got the original handwritten manuscript here, so maybe we could have a look through some of that and see whether we can find some references. That's it all in there, isn't it? Okay, let's put it over here.
So I think it has been separated into chapter order, so hopefully we can find something on specific works.
Well, That's all stuff on the rock drill in there, isn't it? Venus. That says London statues. Maybe that's the Strand statues. Let's have a look at those. You know, his writing is so impossible to read.
I know.
It really is. I'd been like